Hello, my loves. Today we're going to look at some more Reddit stories, and if you've enjoyed a Reddit story, why don't you consider hitting the subscribe button? Maybe that's the notification bell too, and let's start with today's story. Story 1: A Brother's Silent Cry. In a small town nestled between rolling hills, there lived two brothers, Adam and Jake. Adam, the older of the two, was 14, while Jake was 10. They lived with their mother, Laura, and their stepfather, Paul, in a modest house at the end of a quiet street. To the outside world, they seemed like a typical family, but behind closed doors, a dark secret loomed. Paul, who had once seemed charming and kind, showed a different side after marrying Laura. His anger was unpredictable, and his temper often flared without warning. Unfortunately, Jake bore the brunt of Paul's rage. Adam often watched helplessly as Paul berated and sometimes hit Jake for the smallest infractions: spilled milk, a toy left out, or a simple mistake on homework. Jake, a quiet and gentle boy, would try to shrink into the background, but nothing seemed to protect him from Paul's wrath. One evening, while Adam was doing his homework, he heard a loud crash followed by Jake's cries. His heart pounded as he ran to the living room. There, he saw Paul standing over Jake, who was curled up on the floor, trying to shield himself. Without thinking, Adam stepped between them, facing his stepfather with a defiance he didn't know he possessed. "Leave him alone," Adam shouted, his voice trembling with both fear and anger. Paul glared at Adam, his eyes filled with fury. "You think you can tell me what to do, boy? Stay out of this." But Adam didn't move. He stood his ground, trying to protect his brother. Paul raised his hand, but just then, Laura entered the room. She saw the scene and rushed to Adam's side, placing herself between her sons and Paul. "That's enough, Paul," Laura yelled, her voice steady and resolute. "You need to leave. Now." Paul's face contorted with rage, but he didn't argue. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The room fell silent except for Jake's sobs. Laura knelt beside him, holding him close and whispering words of comfort. Over the next few days, Laura took action. She filed a restraining order against Paul and sought help from a local domestic violence support group. She realized that she had to protect her children and herself from the man she once thought she knew. Laura and the boys moved into a shelter temporarily, where they received counseling and support. Adam was grateful for the change but still worried about Jake, who had become even quieter and more withdrawn. One day, a counselor named Mrs. Thompson sat with Adam and Jake for a session. She encouraged Jake to express his feelings, but he remained silent. Adam, feeling his brother's pain, gently held his hand. "It's okay, Jake," Adam said softly. "You're safe now. We're both safe." Tears welled up in Jake's eyes as he finally spoke. "I was so scared, Adam. I thought it would never end." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. "It's natural to feel scared, Jake. But you're very brave, both of you. Healing takes time, but you're not alone. We're here to help you." With time, patience, and support, Jake slowly began to heal. He started to open up about his experiences and began to regain his confidence. Adam, always by his side, encouraged him every step of the way. Laura found a new job, and they moved into a small but cozy apartment. Life was not without its challenges, but the atmosphere was filled with love and safety. Adam and Jake grew closer, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced together. Years later, Adam looked back on those dark days with a sense of pride. They had overcome so much, and their family had emerged stronger. He realized that standing up to Paul had been the turning point, not just for Jake, but for all of them. Adam and Jake's story became an inspiration to others in their community, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love and support in overcoming even the darkest times. Story 2: Breaking the Chains. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, there lived a woman named Sarah. To the outside world, Sarah had a perfect life, a loving husband, James, and 2 beautiful children. However, behind the closed doors of their immaculate home, Sarah's life was anything but perfect. James had a temper. What started as small outbursts of anger gradually escalated into verbal abuse, and eventually, physical violence. Sarah lived in constant fear, trying to shield her children from the horrors of their father's wrath. She often found herself making excuses for James's behavior, hoping that one day he would change. One evening, after an argument about a trivial matter, James's anger boiled over. He struck Sarah, leaving her with a swollen eye and bruises on her arms. As she lay on the floor, a wave of despair washed over her. She realized that this could not go on. She needed to protect herself and her children. The next day, Sarah mustered the courage to visit a local women's shelter. She met with a counselor named Lisa, who listened to her story with compassion and understanding. Lisa explained the cycle of abuse and assured Sarah that she was not alone. With Lisa's help, Sarah devised a plan to leave James safely. That night, after James had fallen asleep, Sarah quietly packed a few belongings and woke her children. They tiptoed out of the house and drove to the shelter, where they were welcomed with open arms. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. At the shelter, Sarah and her children found solace and support. The other women there shared their stories, and Sarah realized she was part of a community of survivors. With the help of the shelter staff, she began the process of rebuilding her life. She filed for a restraining order against James and started attending therapy sessions to heal from the trauma. Sarah also enrolled in a job training program offered by the shelter. She had always dreamed of becoming a nurse, and now she saw a chance to make that dream a reality. With determination and hard work, Sarah completed her training and secured a job at a local hospital. The children, too, began to thrive in the new environment. Free from the constant fear and tension, they excelled in school and made new friends. Sarah saw the light return to their eyes and knew she had made the right decision. Months turned into years, and Sarah's life transformed completely. She and her children moved into their own apartment, a place filled with love and laughter. Sarah continued her education, eventually becoming a registered nurse. She found fulfillment in helping others, using her experiences to connect with patients who had endured similar struggles. James, meanwhile, faced the consequences of his actions. The restraining order kept him away from Sarah and the children, and he was required to attend anger management classes. Over time, he began to understand the gravity of his behavior, but it was too late to undo the damage he had caused. Sarah's journey was not easy. She faced many challenges and moments of doubt, but she never gave up. With each step forward, she grew stronger and more resilient. She became an advocate for domestic violence survivors, sharing her story to inspire others to break free from the chains of abuse. In the end, Sarah's courage and determination not only saved her life, but also set an example for her children and countless others. Her story became a beacon of hope, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the possibility of a brighter future, free from fear and violence. Story 3. I think my stepmom killed my dad, and it sickens me how relieved his death made me. My biological father and the woman I call stepmother, who will be called Kathy, must have seemed like a very happy couple. Kathy seemed to like my father very much, and they had similar views on most things. I cut off contact with my father when I turned 18, with only birthday messages filling the chat box. I wanted to reconnect someday, but after understanding how much pain he had caused my mother and me, after therapy opened my eyes, I felt wrong in forgiving him. To really understand my thinking, I have to tell you about my father. My father was not a good man during most of my childhood. He not only abused my mother and me, but also abused substances such as alcohol and drugs. Most of my mental disorders were the result of his heavy drug use while my mother was pregnant. All of my siblings suffered from the same disorder, which shows how long my father used these substances. This caused him to do a lot of things that he would later be angry about, the biggest of which was not trying to quit. His inaction to help with his addiction led my mother to file for divorce after becoming pregnant with my baby, and he only saw us supportively in the months that followed. I don't completely blame my father for how he became a member. My grandparents were immigrants from the boat with an extremely loose line when it came to discipline and abuse, which is my polite way of saying that mistreatment wasn't in their vocabulary. While my grandfather cherished me, he was an authoritative man with a heavy hand while my father was a child. My father was the best he could offer growing up. He was taught that physical action was discipline, and he used what he learned. We'll never erase the good things he did, or the happy times we shared. But I can still remember one night, crying when he hit my mother or me. Or the nights when my mother lay in bed with me, and I asked, "When is that monster leaving the house?" He didn't tell me when to come home because he worked away from home and would stay with his mother, my grandmother, on weekdays. I don't know if that's true, but I highly suspect that he also cheated multiple times on those nights that week. When my mother finally kissed my father, I felt like a chain was breaking. My mother was freed from his hands every time he drank alcohol or used drugs. My father did not accept kissing with the same level of optimism. My dad would bring the girls home, and every time my siblings and I saw him, he was on a date with someone else. Until one visit, it was still that girl. This is when Kathy appears. She was kind to me, but honestly, I attribute that to the fact that I can actually take care of myself when the kids need help with eating, bathing, and dressing. She also didn't have a daughter of her own, so she showed me a lot of things that my overprotective mother didn't, little things like how to horn and how to hold a gun. I think I quit because of Kathy, after realizing he didn't want to ruin two marriages. He was different than before I cut off contact. I can remember exactly how I received the information. I was at the mall and talking to a high school friend I hadn't seen in years. My mother texted me to come home, it was very important. I said goodbye to my friend before going home and found my mom out in the backyard with my aunt and uncle, who was my dad's friend before he started using drugs. And it was there that my mother told me that my father must die of a rare genetic disease, information that I still do not fully know, although it is very important information. Kathy talked to my grandmother, and the news spread through the family. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why do you think your stepmother killed your father, reader? It is because the circumstances of his death were so surprising. Peace of mind. Just a few hours ago, my dad posted on his social media about the election and other things. The next day, he died from a genetic disease that I, having lived for over 20 years of my life, knew he had. That no one seems to know he has that disease? Furthermore, Kathy did not have a post-mortem experience and cremated him right at the hospital. She didn't tell us anything about how, when, where, or why he died. No name of the hospital, no doctor, no funeral or visitation, nothing. The feeling of relaxation when he passed away makes me feel guilty to this day. My father had a habit of lying to me and my family, and the fact that he could no longer act condescendingly towards us made me a little happy. I said I care about inheritance. My father has a habit: take out all my savings if you need money. At that time I didn't want money, I just felt at peace because I wasn't afraid of him coming back to deceive my family again. But part of me wonders if the data here is a genetic disease. I wouldn't be surprised if my father started using again and drained the account, just like he did during his days with my mother. Perhaps Kathy had fallen victim to my father as my mother had, and was simply angry. But, as unlikely as that may seem, he did very well. I thought that Kathy had killed my father to secure his money, that at last, my father had an equal to Kathy. Perhaps Kathy was the abuser and my father the victim, and sweet karma had come to collect the long-needed debts. What really strengthens my theory is the fact that my cousin and I think alike. My cousin and I are like night and day, black and white, sun and moon. We are complete opposites. So the fact that we just think alike means hell has frozen over. Kathy finally gave me a box of things. I expected she didn't want anything. I'm still upset that she disappeared after that, with no explanation or answer. However, my father's family didn't like her very much, so she had no reason to stay. I don't champion that she passed away so quickly. If she was truly in mourning, she would have had to sort out a lot of things physically and mentally. However, sometimes I finish the quest, so I try to learn about her. Kathy was a crazy woman, and to be honest, the mystery of my father's illness and sudden death stilled my mind in those terrifying minutes of the night. Story 4. My uncle physically hurt me and my mom. Okay, as I said in the title, my uncle is 34 years old, almost 1.7 meters tall. I'm 14 years old, I'm a child, don't leave me alone, and my mother is 36 years old. So basically, what happened was it was just the three of us at home. My mom and I were visiting family. There was us, my grandma, and my uncle. But my other uncle and his girlfriend were flying in, and we hadn't seen him in months. So I made posters, and we hung them around the house for when he got there. My grandmother was at the airport to pick them up. We were all supposed to wear a shirt with something written on it, I don't remember what. But my shirt was too small and uncomfortable for me because I usually wear baggy clothes. My uncle said it was silly and that I could wear it for 5 minutes, but I didn't want to because it made me really uncomfortable. Finally, I walked up the stairs to calm down. According to my mother, I can't remember clearly. I kept talking, which made my uncle really mad. I heard him shouting at me, telling me to go back there. I heard my mother scream. I don't know if it was a word or what. I was really worried about her because my uncle has a history of violence. I ran down the stairs and yelled at my uncle. I don't remember much from it, it's all a blur, so this is based on what my mother told me. Okay, my mom and uncle were sitting on the couch. I started running down the stairs. My uncle stood up and started running toward me. My mom tried to stop him to protect me, but he pushed my mom into the wall and floor, injuring her. He ran towards me, I waved my hand, and he pushed me against the wall. The only thing I remember next was me in the corner, my uncle holding my hair in one hand, my mother between us, and me getting punched in the jaw. Both me and my mother fell to the floor, and my uncle just stood there and took my glasses again. My mother and I went out. My mother sat down, her head hurt, and she was very dizzy. I chased the dogs so they wouldn't run away. My uncle ran out to catch the dogs, but I told him to come inside. We argued, and the dogs ran back into the house. At that time, my mother took my phone and called my grandmother. We sat out there for a while. My uncle came out and asked my mother a few questions. She knew my birthday and hers, but she didn't know it was 2023. He took my mother into the house and got her an ice pack. She sat on the chair crying. I sat next to her on the chair and had a panic attack. After what seemed like an eternity, my grandmother, other uncle, and his girlfriend arrived. But my grandmother was more worried about my uncle's dog's reaction than her daughter's health. The uncle just came to ask if my mother was okay. She said she was fine, and he went out with his dog. Everyone acted completely normal with the uncle who beat me. My grandmother stared at me ever since she got there as if she hated me. When my mother felt better and was no longer dizzy, we packed our things and left. When we got home, my mother fell asleep and slept for 12 hours. I couldn't sleep. What happened kept replaying in my head for hours. I finally fell asleep because I had only slept 2 hours the night before. I was showing attitude and being brash, but that doesn't justify a grown man attacking me and my mother over a shirt. My mother and I blocked my uncle immediately, and he will never be in our lives again. My mom wanted to keep in touch with my grandmother for a bit, but when I woke up, my mom told me she was blocked. She texted her, saying that she and my uncle ruined everything, and she posted about it on Facebook. We will apply for a restraining order against my uncle. My mom had a mild concussion, and my jaw hurt really badly. My head hurts quite badly, and my neck and back ache. We will get a restraining order against my uncle, and my father will file a police report. I'm so terrified now. I'm afraid to leave the house. My friends are doing everything they can to help me, but there's not much they can do. If you read all this, thank you. We are handling it as best we can. If my jaw doesn't get better in the next few days, I will go to the hospital to get it checked. I don't think it's broken. I think the bone is just bruised, but I still want to get it checked. Story 5: The Courage to Speak. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a close-knit family often gathered for Sunday dinners. Among the regular attendees was a young boy named Alex, who always seemed a bit withdrawn. Alex was 12 years old, and his cousins, Mike and Lily, often wondered why he rarely smiled and why his eyes held a sadness that no child should bear. One evening, during one of these family gatherings, Mike noticed a bruise on Alex's arm. When he asked about it, Alex shrugged it off, saying he had fallen off his bike. But Mike wasn't convinced. He had seen similar bruises on Alex before, each time with a different explanation. Mike decided to keep a closer eye on Alex. Over the next few weeks, he noticed more bruises and a growing fear in Alex's eyes whenever his father, Uncle Tom, was around. Tom was known to have a short temper, but the extent of his cruelty was something the family hadn't fully realized. One day, after school, Mike found Alex sitting alone in the backyard, staring blankly at the ground. Mike sat down next to him and gently asked, "Alex, what's really going on? You can trust me." Alex hesitated, tears welling up in his eyes. "It's my dad," he finally whispered. "He's always angry. He hits me for everything. I can't do anything right." Mike felt a surge of anger and sadness. He hugged Alex tightly. "You don't deserve this, Alex. We have to tell someone. This can't keep happening." Alex shook his head vigorously. "No, Mike. He'll hurt me even more if he finds out I told anyone. And he'll hurt Mom too." Mike felt a knot in his stomach. He knew he had to do something, but he also understood Alex's fear. He decided to talk to his own parents first, hoping they would know how to handle the situation. That evening, Mike approached his parents, John and Mary, and told them everything Alex had shared. They listened intently, their faces growing more concerned with each passing moment. "We need to help him," Mike insisted. "We can't just ignore this." John nodded. "You're right, Mike. We can't let this go on. We'll talk to Alex's mom, and if necessary, we'll involve the authorities. But we have to be careful." The next day, John and Mary invited Alex's mother, Aunt Lisa, over for coffee. As they talked, they gently broached the subject of Tom's temper and the possibility of abuse. Lisa initially denied it, but as tears filled her eyes, she finally admitted the truth. "He's been like this for years," Lisa confessed. "I thought I could manage it, that it would get better. But it's only gotten worse. I'm terrified for Alex, but I don't know how to leave. I don't know where to go." Mary took Lisa's hand. "You don't have to do this alone. There are shelters and organizations that can help. We will support you every step of the way." With John and Mary's help, Lisa contacted a local domestic violence shelter. They provided her with resources and a plan to leave safely. Lisa gathered the courage to take action, knowing she had the support of her extended family. One evening, while Tom was out, Lisa packed their essentials and left with Alex to the shelter. It was a difficult and emotional step, but she knew it was the right one. The shelter provided them with a safe place to stay, counseling, and legal assistance. Tom was furious when he found out, but the restraining order kept him at bay. Lisa filed for divorce and sought custody of Alex. The process was long and challenging, but with the support of her family and the shelter, she remained steadfast. Alex struggled with the trauma of his father's abuse, but with therapy and the loving support of his mother and cousins, he began to heal. He found solace in activities he enjoyed, like drawing and playing soccer. Slowly, his laughter returned, and the fear in his eyes faded. Years later, Alex stood before a group of children and parents at a community center, sharing his story. I was afraid to speak up, but my cousin Mike helped me find the courage. No one deserves to live in fear. If you're being hurt, tell someone you trust. There is help, and there is hope. His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom were facing similar struggles. Alex's journey from a life of fear to one of empowerment inspired others to seek help and break free from the chains of abuse. Alex and his family had come a long way, and their story was a powerful reminder of the importance of speaking out and supporting one another. In the end, the courage to speak had not only saved Alex but had also given him a platform to help others find their own voice. Story 6. Why are adults unkind to children that come from disadvantaged families? I grew up in a dysfunctional family, to say the least. Family violence, perpetrated by both my parents to each other and towards the children, and my oldest brother was very violent with the other siblings too. The abuse was mostly physical, verbal/psychological, but also some of my siblings were sexually molested by a friend of the family. There was also a vast amount of neglect. I broke my arm and my parents didn't take me to the hospital for weeks, never went to the dentist, didn't even go to school from grade 2 onwards. Often there were times where there wasn't enough food to eat, and because we had to rely on tank water, there were periods of time where we wouldn't have money to get water carted in, so there wouldn't be any water to shower or flush the toilet with. My mom was a victim of abuse from my father on more occasions than I can actually remember, including an attempt of strangulation to the point of unconsciousness that I witnessed. He told me that was in your honor after my mom had accused him of sexually molesting me. He also attacked her so severely on one occasion while pregnant that it resulted in a stillbirth. My dad is a piece of shit. From what I understand, he grew up in a daily unstable environment, but as an adult I cannot accept that he didn't have the capacity to change and that it was solely generational trauma he was passing down. He chose to be the way he was and took no steps to attempt to change. My mom, without a shadow of a doubt, has an undiagnosed mental illness. She is a compulsive liar. She'd make up anything that would get people to give her things/sympathy. She was a drug addict, addicted to any legal opioid she could get her hands on. This was mostly medication such as paracetamol, codeine, or just straight-up codeine when it was available to purchase OTC. She'd pharmacy hop daily, and there were a few pharmacists that she knew so well she'd send different siblings in with notes to purchase medication for her. She treated most of her kids, some she treated better, worse than I'd treat my enemy. She called me little bitch from the age of 3, possibly younger, but obviously I can't remember. She would let me know I was far less attractive than my other sisters, and also would make comments about my legs and how fat they were despite never actually being overweight. Anyway, I could go on, but you get the idea. I don't know why, but recently I've been having a lot of random memories from my childhood pop up. Not just of awful things my parents did to us, but of those people outside the family would treat us. I remember when the two main pharmacies cottoned on to the fact my mom was buying codeine in large quantities from both. The pharmacist screamed at me, a little 12 years old, walking in with a note written by my mother, who I was terrified of, about how he knew that mom was pharmacy hopping and that he wouldn't serve us again. He did this in front of other customers, small town, so people that I'd encountered before, and made me feel so disgusted and ashamed of myself. Another time was when I was part of a club and supplies started going missing: toilet paper, milk, Milo, and was completely ostracized, accused and excluded by the entire team of adults running the club. Even when the real thief had been uncovered, no apology or acknowledgement of mistake was ever offered. There was another time that my father had punched me in the mouth so bad that the inside of my lip was cut and spurting blood, which resulted in the exterior being bruised and swollen for a long while. Shop attendants in the town were very rude to me during the time while my lip was stuffed up. These are just a few examples of many. I would like to add that I don't believe I was an awful child. I never swore and, in my opinion, wasn't rude, always used manners, and was so painful shy to the point of finding it difficult to look people in the eyes because I truly believed I was scum. What I would like to know is why adults outside the family were also rude/unkind to me as a child. It's just now as an adult I've realized how fucked it is that random adults would treat a child that was obviously having an absolute horrendous time at home so badly. Story 7: Growing Up in an Abusive Home. I, 21-year-old, was in and out of the foster system. My 20-year-old brother was adopted the first time we entered the system. I wasn't allowed to be because my mother decided that she wanted me. 6 years after she got me back from the system, my mom had another child with a different guy. At this point, I was 6, turning 7 a month before my youngest brother was born. My mom sent me to stay with my brother's grandparents every weekend and any time I didn't have school. My brother's grandfather started to molest me at the age of 7. After each time he did it, he would give me money or take me to the mall and let me get whatever I wanted. He would show me porn movies and tell me that's what he was going to do with me. Once I told him to stop and he pulled out a shotgun from under his bed and told me, "If you tell anyone, I will kill your brother and mom in front of you." The day I turned 9 was the first time he raped me. After he took me to the mall. I tried to tell my mom about it, but she ignored me and hit me for making up stories. When I was 11, a family friend, police officer, asked me if I was okay and if there anything happening with my brother's grandfather, and I said no. Around this time my mom started using meth again and she basically disappeared. My brother and I saw her 2 times a week on her down days. When I did see her, she would scream at me and beat me. During this time we started going over to my brother's grandparents' house more due to my mom wanting to throw parties at the house. 5 months after my 13th birthday, I tried to kill myself. I was getting bullied and tormented at school. Outside of school, I was getting screamed at, beat and raped. I couldn't handle it anymore. My mom's boyfriend at the time found me on the bathroom floor oating and called 911. When I was 14, I decided I didn't want to go over there anymore. I was just starting high school, making new friends and starting paying a lot of sports. At this point, I saw my mom 1 time a week, and the rest of the time I was taking care of my little brother. Took him to school, fed him, bathed him, helped him with homework, and put him to bed. I started to miss a lot of school due to him getting out early than I did, starting later, or just having days off that I didn't have. Teachers started to get worried and CPS talked to me. I lied and said nothing was happening. School year was over and summer break started. We started to see my mom more now and the abuse got worse every day. A week after school was let out for summer break, my mom found out I had a boyfriend. she started to punch me in the head and stomach, calling me a whore and slut. She kept telling me to admit that I was a slut. My little brother watched it happen and was screaming and crying. I wouldn't stop crying due to my head hurts so much. She told me to get into the car and drove to the ER. We parked, and as we were walking in, she changed her mind and said that she didn't want people to stare at her. When we got into the car, she accused me of being pregnant and forced me to go to the store and buy a pregnancy test. When we got to the store, she refused to go in and told me to stop crying when I'm in there. When I returned, she told me to just admit that I was a slut or to get out of her house. I packed a bag and went to my best friend's house. I was there for a week before my mom came to look for me. She apologized and said that she wouldn't ever hit me again and that she was so sorry and she loved me. I believed her and went home. Mid-July comes around and my mom woke me up screaming that her boyfriend at the time touched my brother and I. She called the police and they questioned us. They came to the conclusion that she was on drugs and detained her. Police waited with my brother and I until CPS came. My mom was put on a 5150 hold and both my brother and I were placed grandparents' house. That night I remember waking up to his grandpa on top of me covering my mouth. I felt like I couldn't move and started to cry. When he was done, he wiped my stomach off and went back to his room. After the 72-hour hold my mom was on, CPS told me I could go back home, so I did. For the first 3 days everything was fine due to my mom sleeping the entire time from being medicated. When she finally woke up, my mom's boyfriend was with her, and she started to scream at me to get her belt. I did, and she started to hit me with it, told me that she didn't love me, that I was the reason why my brother got adopted all those years ago, and that she wished she never kept me. I went up getting away, and I grabbed my already packed bags and I ran until I couldn't anymore. I didn't have anyone to call me besides my brother's grandpa. He came and picked me up from a park 2 miles from my mom's house. I was with him for 2 weeks until CPS showed up and took me to a permanent foster home. When I was visiting my brother, his grandpa would assault me and then give me $50. I was extremely happy in my new home. I finally felt like I had people that loved me and wanted me. After being in the foster home for 10 months, the family wanted to adopt me. My mom told my social worker that she thought me and the father had an inappropriate relationship and that they weren't pushing reunification. I was then taken from that placement and put into another one with a foster mom and biological son. It was hell there. She screamed at me, didn't take me to doctor's appointments, didn't feed me, take me to school, or pick me up at 10 p.m. from work. I ended up in the ER for 7 days because I had an infection. She refused to take me to see a doctor when I asked her to. She allowed her son to hit me. I kept telling my social worker, therapist, and CASA what was going on, and they told me I was being dramatic and that none of that was happening. Foster mom would tell everyone that I was a horrible foster kid and all I did was get into trouble. I started to heavily smoke weed and tried to stay at friends' houses as much as possible. My mom got into contact with me after 4 years of us having zero contact. She apologized to me and told me she was clean and asked if we could have a relationship. I was hesitant, but I didn't have any family, so I agreed. I went back to my home state and visited her and my brother for a week. Everything was fine. I'd never experienced this version of my mom before and I really enjoyed it. After 5 to 6 months of her talking to me all the time and being very nice to me, a flip switched and she started to ignore me for days at a time. Then it moved to weeks and months. I expressed multiple times that I really wanted a relationship with her and that I don't understand why she doesn't want one with me. Any time she would talk to me, it would be about her, and then she would hang up and I wouldn't hear from her for weeks again. All I wanted was for her to be my mom, and she can't be that for some reason. The last time we talked, she told me Andrew passed away, and I said, "Who was that?" "I'm sorry for your loss," and then she would NVM and I haven't heard back from her for the last 4 months. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.